Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and in my wormery the arrangement of stuff is usually oldest stuff over here on the left, and then I kind of spill off to the right to get to the newest stuff, and that leads us to the newest of my systems, which is the ones that we're going to be checking in on today. I mean, it's really just one system, and it's the tub that you see right here with sort of a temporary start tag. At some point, we're going to move these little guys into a larger container. I mean, I even thought about doing it today. Here's the container I had envisioned as their new home, but I thought we would just stick to the temporary small accommodations for now, and take care of what's in this container too. So why don't I get these things up onto the bench, and I'll explain in greater detail what's going on here, and then we'll proceed to getting these little guys fed. So if this cool yellow bucket looks familiar, the reason is because its other half, which is this top ring of square plastic, turned into my screener many years ago. So this little guy gets a little bit more airtime than this little guy does, but just as important is a good sized tub to have around to put stuff into, and I always get a kick out of the pattern on here. It's got the little child about to fall into the bucket symbol. So really quick, just to dispense with some of the stuff that's out here for backstory, that was my screener. The other half of it is this container in which we're storing the stuff that I was able to screen out of the what I consider to be finished castings that these worms were baited out of. And these things here are just here to demonstrate how I baited the worms out of two systems that had been more or less depopulated. We used these little bait trays to get stragglers remaining in the material to come together, and it was kind of a godsend because the systems that were launched with the majority of the worms that these worms were related to all died, and these little guys remaining as stragglers have now been collected up to kind of carry on because they're the only survivors. So kind of a bittersweet story there. But I did attempt to come back in here after our last check-in, so the way you see it here might not be the same as you remember it. I did attempt to more thoroughly cover up with both paper and plastic, so this is a little bit better covered than how it looked last time. You know, last time was its launch, basically. Taking the bait stations, emptying them, putting them in here, and then kind of kicking off a brand new bin that's now 12 days old. So this stuff here is all very familiar stuff. This is basically the stuff that these little guys exited, but it wasn't fine enough to be considered as finished castings. I bet you now that it's a little bit drier, I could probably even crumble it down to a point where I could screen it again and collect a little bit more castings material, but I got plenty of this stuff, and this is all nice familiar material which I thought I would be giving back to the worms. I believe there is space enough in here to get that done, but other than that, besides the kind of out of the ordinary bedding solution, I think, you know, once I get some of these things taken care of, kind of all this reuse of the old bedding, the you know, these things that kind of really allow the system to depart or disconnect from its old self and become its own new self. So before we put in the recovered bedding and pile in today's feeding, which is going to be pumpkin, and that's pretty routine, but the unusual stuff I'm going to be trying out is some of this batter. It was meant to be a pastry, never really happened. It started getting kind of dry, so I soaked it, poured a bunch of water in here to kind of make it smooth. And we're not going to give them all that, that's for sure. I'm just going to test drive it because that is this will be the first time me trying to use that stuff. So I do see the remains of one of the banana peels that was fed. And this was the more familiar material that the worms were placed in here with when we emptied the bait boxes. And we gave them a banana peel, but there were two other banana peels put in here. One of the banana peels was placed into just clean, unused bedding. Kind of smack into the middle to see if it might, you know, attract a few worms to bravely go out into the kind of not broken in bedding, and it seems like they've managed to overcome their, you know, probably a little bit hesitance to get over there. But here we placed sort of an intermediate material. It was just another collection of sort of reused bedding materials, very similar to this. And this was much more familiar. It seems like we got a lot more worms that came out to indulge in the banana peel that was placed into that particular bedding. But it just seemed like an interesting way to launch the system, was to, you know, give them their familiar material that they came in, to not force them into a new environment, which I think might have been part of the problem. That well, I know it is part of it's the problem that did away the initial first migration of worms into their new systems that all crashed and burned. So yeah, I'm glad that we've got these little stragglers. So, you know, I don't want to conform to what we did here. I'd really like to just blend it all together in a way. At this point, it does seem like worms have voluntarily moved into all the materials here, so there's really no need to provide them with, you know, more time to get comfortable with it. This will take a good bit of brand new bedding and just blend it in throughout with some more seasoned materials, all voluntarily occupied by worms. Some of it more heavily occupied than others, but I think it'll all be good, comfortable stuff that the worms can hang out in. And then the stuff that we're going to introducing them back to it, I figured I'd kind of lay that out as just sort of a top coating, but only in half of the container, just in case there is an issue with it. So before we do that, we'll also drop in some of their fresh food. So that'll be sort of down in an intermediate layer, not in a particular feeding zone, but more like a feeding layer, if that makes sense. It's kind of nice that we've got this kind of nice, hardly used bedding out here that we can dump some of that weird stuff into. So why don't we begin with that? It had this kind of like consistency and sound to it, even like of mousse. When I started, it had sort of like this airy kind of texture to it. So I think the pumpkin is going to be a given, that they're going to be fine with the pumpkin, but I think perhaps with this stuff I'm going to limit it to only half of the bin, like so. And I've got a whole bunch of it. This will be showing up in other videos in the future too. But these chunks of vegetable, this stuff should be no problem for them, so we'll spread this around. I've even got some grit for them. Grit's always a nice thing to include in the feedings, especially in newer systems like this where there's just no grit around, you know. Older systems eventually, you know, develop a nice supply of grit available to the worms, but let's see, what else? I thought that before we would come in with this, do we really want to pile it on entirely? I mean, across the entire surface? I don't see any reason for concern, you know. I mean, this is the stuff that I baited them out of, and it's really the stuff they were just in, you know. And okay, here's good evidence too that there's nothing wrong with it, because something I assumed was that there was going to be some extra worms coming over in this stuff, because there was just not going to be any possible way to ensure that no worms remained. So I already kind of anticipated that, and everything came out of here pretty easily. And I think that's it. That's technically feeding number 2 now, because when we launched these little guys 12 days ago into this temporary container, we you know, we did feed them. It was a pretty modest feeding with those banana peels, wasn't much, and those still linger in here as leftovers. So hopefully that's stuff that the worms can make good use of. This will definitely be temporary, I think, but still I'm gonna give them just a little bit more grit in case they need it, and then we can start coming back on here with the coverings. So I see we've got a little collection of springtails hanging out here on some of these top covering pieces of paper. Doesn't seem like the worms, I guess here's one. Didn't seem like there was a big turnout on the newspaper when it comes to worms, although here and there I do see a couple. But I thought that if I came back in here, which, you know, like I said earlier, was something I did off camera. I did come back in here after our check-in here together when we launched the worms, and then I did what you saw here, was just cover up a little bit better and do my best to see if I can help limit drying. Same thing with these extra covers too, because you might remember the only thing we really had as a cover was this little baggie right here, but we've since upgraded to much better plastic coverage. And until we position them in their permanent larger home, which I think is a fitting next step, then I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay for one more round in this temporary container. When we get them into their forever home, at least the home that they're going to be in for a few months, we'll give them an official sticker too. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.